And we're back for another OT edition of the Sports Outlaws on the Talk Monster. And the OT edition is where we give you a little something extra that you didn't have to pay for.
Of course.
You didn't have to pay for this. And today we have a special guest. We had him on a couple of weeks ago talking about the NBA draft, and so we're going to wrap that up. And we have my main man, Chris Dortch, Blue Ribbon, the College Basketball Yearbook. He's also does some golf writing. He's on the Big Ten Network.
He's everywhere.
He's getting paid. And that's what I like. He's getting paid. Professor D, how you doing?
Good, boys. How are you?
We're doing
well, Chris.
And just to wrap up this draft coverage, Chris, I know that you scouted some of these players and did articles on them. And some of the guys that you wrote about were drafted, well, almost all of them. And we wanted to just take a look at some of the guys who you mentioned. And let's first talk about.
Well, before you get to him, Freak, you mentioned it on Sport Talk, Chris, but you expected a surprise at the number one slot. Yeah. We got that, but was it the surprise you expected?
Well, I'm glad you remember that, man. I did say that, and I thought that I didn't think that Cleveland would go with Nerlens Noel at number one. I wasn't sure that he would fall as far as he did, but I just had an idea that they would make another move. And the one that they went with, Anthony Bennett, was a little bit of a surprise, but there was some relationship, which I can't remember, that he had a teammate at UNLV who was related to somebody with the Cavs, and there was some kind of a prior relationship there where, character is such an important part of the evaluation process, and I guess because of that relationship, they weren't worried about that. And, a lot of people were surprised, but I think if you could find a fault with Anthony Bennett, it would be maybe that he doesn't have prototypical NBA size. But then again, he may not be limited to just one position. He may be a rare kind of talent that can play inside and out, even though he's really a little under 6'8". But he can shoot it from deep, and he can rebound it, and he competes. So I think that was probably a pretty good choice, as we'll see. Now, the thing that I thought might happen, I thought they might pick Ben McLemore. They didn't end up doing that. That would not have surprised me either.
Were you surprised to see McLemore slide the way he did?
A little bit. I think some teams in the future may regret it, too. I think that he kind of got some... I guess a lot of people thought he split because of his agent, and I'm not sure what all happened, but suffice it to say he was given some bad advice and maybe held out of some pre-draft stuff that he shouldn't have been, and I think people worried about that. But, I don't think that paints the kid necessarily. So what I think he is a big-time talent who can jump and shoot it from deep, which is a rare combination. He's not the most aggressive guy in the world, but if he ever had a fire lit under him, I think he could be somebody that could be a real star. And to see him go that far was a little bit of a surprise, but he did have that, I guess, a little bit of a taint, according to some of the GMs and stuff that the draft analysts talk to.
Now, Chris, obviously the number one pick was a surprise. I didn't see Anthony going anywhere near the number one spot. Well, I don't want to say anywhere near, but obviously number one was a huge deal. The question I have is with the Charlotte Bobcats. You just mentioned McLemore. You mentioned you had Noel still hanging around. They go after Cody Zeller. Now, I know this guy's a great athlete, will probably be a solid player in the National Basketball Association, but at that pick, you're not looking for a solid player, are you? You're looking for a stud.
Well, some could argue that there weren't many of those kind available.
Well, true.
Draft. But, you're right. I mean, Charlotte, under Jordan's leadership, really has not had a good series of drafts, and this one was a head scratcher. I think any of the analysts. I am not one of those guys that labor over mock drafts and that kind of stuff. My role was more a profiler of some of the candidates that'll be drafted. But a lot of the guys who do these mock drafts were just stunned by the pick. And, I think Zeller, he tested out really well in the Chicago pre-draft combine. He's a good athlete and obviously combines that with size. But I don't think anybody thought that he was a guy that, might end up being a perennial all-star. And I think some people think that two people they passed on will. One of them being McLemore. And again, I think in time that'll probably be proven to be correct.
Now, Chris, let's go from some guys who were probably overdrafted to some guys who maybe kind of slipped through the cracks a little bit, but you profiled them, and I've seen this on multiple websites about the guard out of Providence, Ricky Lido, maybe being the steal of the draft in the second round by the Dallas Mavericks. Tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, he's a guy that I wrote about and was able to talk to his agent, talk to Ed Cooley, the former Providence coach. And the thing about him was that nobody really knew what he could do. Some people likened him to back in the old days when players would jump straight from high school. And I disagreed with that because, he was able to practice with Providence. He wasn't able to play because the NCAA ruled him academically ineligible. But I talked to Ed Cooley, the Providence coach, and he said that this kid had a wow moment in every practice. And he mainly ran the scout team for Providence, and he would at various times be, Peyton Siva or Michael Carter-Williams, and then he would mess up because he, as Cooley said, he would knock down about 6 25-footers in a row. And to be an accurate duplication of Siva and Michael Carter-Williams, you're not supposed to shoot that well.
Right.
But he's supposedly a big-time scorer. He's 6'6", he's athletic, and I think he might end up being a steal. I really do. He was a top 25 high school player. So usually those guys end up making their way into the NBA draft, and a lot of them do very well.
There's another player that you featured as well, who I think could be especially starting off his NBA career, maybe a six-man type of player. And we talked about this guy earlier when we talked to you about the NBA draft. Eric Green, who was drafted by the Denver Nuggets. He seems like a good fit for that type of system that they run up there.
Yeah, another guy that I wrote about and was able to talk to. Really good guy, good interview. Comes from a good family background. So, he kind of passes the character test that they look for. Was instilled, his parents instilled in him a work ethic. And he was a guy that he told me that last summer his goal was to make 20,000 shots.
Wow.
And even his coaches at Virginia Tech didn't think he could do it, but he did. And he said that sometimes necessitated taking a little nap in the gym. So, when the old cliche about living in the gym, this guy practically did that. And I think the knock on him was he ended up leading the nation in scoring, by the way. Virginia Tech wasn't a very good team this year, and despite his presence, the knock on him was that maybe he was a little bit of an undersized two-guard, but he tried to prove he could play the point this year, and he averaged almost 4 assists, and I think he had an assist on 27% of his possessions. So for a guy to lead the nation in scoring and still assist on a fourth of his possessions, to me, that's pretty incredible.
In the ACC, no doubt. I mean, how could this guy from one of the power conferences get overlooked until the second round?
Well, I think that I think you fall victim to measurables, and being a step slow. Not in his case, but in his case, it was an inch or two short, and I think you're seeing a lot of that happening. But I've been reading and studying and talking to people a lot. What I think is a growing trend. To toward a use of analytics, like have been adopted in baseball.
Right.
And a lot of NBA coaches and general managers are using these analytics, really breaking down stats to the nth degree. Some of them which I don't even pretend to understand. And I'm still an old school guy.
Right.
I don't utilize them heavily, but analytics are sometimes used. I think that's why Brad Stevens, in fact, the Butler coach, got hired by the Boston Celtics. One of the reasons is that he's a real proponent of analytics to evaluate talent and develop strategy. So that's kind of the way the league is going, and I think as we see that, you'll maybe see some people that might not have prototypical size or speed, but if you break it down and get under the surface with these analytical statistics, you'll see that they produce.
Chris, we want to talk about Brad Stevens and, of course, Will Wade, UTC's own basketball coach. But before we do that, if you could pick one winner and one loser, talking about the teams in the NBA draft, who would they be?
Well, I like Portland's draft. I really do. And because they got my boy C.J. McCollum and
Lehigh, right?
From Lehigh, and he was a guy that I really thought blossomed. He broke his foot midway through the college year and wasn't able to play, and for a while I think people were concerned, but after he was cleared medically, I think that was in March, he was able to get out there and work out, and people realized he could be a steal. I think he's going to team with Damian Lillard, who was another guy. He came from Weber State. He was the Rookie of the Year for the Blazers this year, and I think he'll team with him. Even though he's kind of a combo guard, both of them need to have the ball in their hand to be successful, but I think they'll coexist. But the Blazers also got this kid, Alan Crabb, from Cal, who's a big-time shooter. And then they got Jeff Withey, the Kansas big man, who's a shot blocker. Both of those guys came in the second round. So I thought they really did well. We talked about them earlier. I think Charlotte, kind of messed up.
I hate to laugh, but you got to.
Hate to see it for MJ, but,
it's the same way with the Wizards, too. I mean, I don't know how much he's got his hands in the draft and that whole process, but if he has it in it at all, he just needs to stay away, man, because it's been pretty bad.
You look at last year's pick, number 2 pick, I think they had, and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Right, and if you're picking that high, you want a guy that can score a little. Now he might develop into a Tony Allen type guy, but he's got to be able to score too, right, Chris?
If it were me, and I evaluate the same as I would a college player. I think a lot of college coaches have kind of gotten intoxicated by length and athleticism to the exclusion of basketball skills.
Yes.
The most important being able to put the ball in the hole.
Right.
And that was Michael Kidd-Gilchrist kind of the knock on him. He had a little hitch in his jump shot. Now, I thought, in looking at his form and kind of studying it on film, I thought it was something that could be taken out and improved upon. But still, that was kind of a little bit of a surprising pick. But, I think, and this is funny, I remember him knocking down a three-pointer late in the game at Tennessee, which essentially won it. And looking at him at that moment, he reminded me of a young Michael Jordan. And he's a big-time competitor. And I'm sure that's why MJ saw the same thing, that this kid is a competitor. He kind of like a Kobe Bryant that compels his teammates to play better and compete. So maybe that's what they thought they were getting, and he might yet be that.
Yes, a career still young for Mr. Gilchrist, and
that's right.
Who knows?
But they were trying to trade him before the draft, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I just don't know how long you can survive by making bad decisions in the draft. I think that obviously you can do some things with free agency, which we've seen with Dwight Howard and all that. The Lakers have lived by it, but there's salary limitations in place now that might kind of prevent that unless you do some creative cap management. And so I think the draft is the way to go.
I agree with you, Chris. And you mentioned Brad Stevens earlier. What are your thoughts on that hire? You talked about the analytics side of him and how that seems to be a draw. But when you look at it, it seems like this guy, and it just seems like he's a no-nonsense guy. He's not one of those guys that's going to, I don't know if sell is the right word, but it just seems like he's going to tell you like it is, like a Doc Rivers, and, that's it. But what are your thoughts on that hire?
Well, I was surprised, like everybody else, and not so much that they reached out to him in particular, but just that I thought he was there to stay. I remember watching a TV interview with him and his wife, where his wife was quick to mention that a lot of people just don't understand that both her parents and his live in the Indianapolis area, and they were all about family, and he was a guy that really didn't have a big ego and does not have a big ego, and maybe people thought that he was a lifer at Butler. He sort of leaves Butler in a lurch. I mean, they're 2 days into being a member of the Big East and a week away from going out on the road recruiting. Now they're kind of in scramble mode. I think they'll hire a coach pretty quickly.
You think they hire within because, like you said, I mean, this is one of the worst times that he can leave Butler, and he's the main reason Butler's a name right now. So I would assume they hire within.
I think they will. There's an assistant that was on his staff. Was with Thad Matta for a while, actually quit basketball, was away from it for a couple of years, went to Illinois last year, and was rehired just this summer at Butler. And he's a guy that has a chance. And there's an assistant at Michigan who played at Butler, who I think a lot of people think of as the front runner. So I think they will stay within the so-called Butler way. As far as Brad at the Celtics, I think he's got a couple of things if you look at. I tweeted this when I found out. I said, I wonder if he asked, Pitino or Lon Kruger or Mike Montgomery or, any John Calipari, any of the other successful college coaches that didn't really have success at the collegiate or at the NBA level. And then as I thought about it more, and I read some commentary and heard people talk and talked to some people, I realized that maybe Brad Stevens is the perfect NBA coach. He doesn't have an ego. I don't think he has overly high expectations of himself or what he could do, like some of those other coaches I mentioned. And he's also a pioneer with these analytics. He'll bring a guy that's on his staff at Butler, who I've dealt with a little bit. He's a kid that's a year away from having graduated at Duke. Just a real numbers freak. Actually, Will Wade knows him and uses him. So they're going to be wired up with all the statistics that they can use. I think, Miami has done a good job of that. So he comes in with some ready-made skills. Plus, he's a winner, and he's a no-nonsense guy. So, underestimate him at your own peril. He's quiet and unassuming, but there's obviously a toughness there, too.
Now, Chris, will this open up the door for more college coaches to be looked at by NBA teams and getting head jobs in the NBA?
I doubt it. Again, they've got to have those special gifts that Brad Stevens has. I mean, come on. If John Calipari didn't do well, if Rick Pitino, who was given every advantage to revive the Celtics, including partial ownership, and couldn't get it done, it just takes a special person. And I think you've got to understand the NBA, and you've got to understand how to deal with people, manipulate people, get them to do your bidding.
That's a big part of it.
It's a huge part of it. And I talked to Billy Donovan about it once. I've known him for a long time, and he's usually been pretty candid with me about things when I've asked him. And, I'm like, Billy, what's up? When he left Orlando after a day. And he said, I really thought hey, this is all basketball all the time. No dealing with grades, no going out recruiting, no glad handing with alumni, just basketball. But then when he slept on it, he realized that, hey, I'm not this guy. I'm a teacher of young men, and so I think that's part of it. I think at the NBA level, you're a little bit more of a CEO. At the college level, you're still somewhat of a CEO, but you're mainly a teacher and a molder of young men. And I think some can go to the next level and do it, and some are more suited to do it on the collegiate level.
Right.
And Billy Donovan is. And I don't think this will spark a movement. I really don't.
Well, in the college game, you seem to have the players' ears a lot more than you do in the NBA. Like you said, it's more of a CEO position where it's, when you have players like Rondo and you have players that...
let's see him try to mold Rondo.
Yeah, they have that reputation of maybe not being fun to play with, maybe not... I don't want to say a cancer in the locker room, but, something like that. It's hard to deal with that. Then, Brad Stevens, depending on what they do with Rondo, he's going to jump right into the fire. So we'll see what he can do.
Yeah, I mean, and Brad's no dummy, or his agent isn't a dummy. He got a 6-year deal worth $22 million. So
it's not bad. It's better than my deal.
Guaranteed money. So he's going to be okay, and he'll get snapped right back up. He knew.
Yeah, if it all fails with the Celtics, he'll go back to college basketball and get a job in no time. So
the
I don't
guy
think
will
he has
not
anything
be
to worry
on the
about.
street. He's employable in a lot of fronts. I think before Butler, he was in the business world. So
Smart man.
He's not. And that reminds me of something else that I read. He really, unbeknownst to a lot of people, harbored dreams of coaching in the NBA. So, this, I don't know how Danny Ainge of the Celtics and he got together initially. I need to find that story and read that, how the first introduction was made. But apparently they kept it quiet for a week, and this was just something that he wanted to do. So I don't think it's for everybody. And I don't think it'll spark a trend, but I hope he does well. I'm an old school NBA fan, maybe not so much current day as I was back in the day. And the Celtics were always one of my favorite teams. So
you're not wearing your Jordans right now, are you?
Oh, he's wearing his short Boston Celtics shorts.
That's right. It's in a jersey that says Havlicek on it.
Chris, we just have a few minutes left. We mentioned Will Wade, and I know you've shared your thoughts on him before, but for all of the listeners out there in Chattanooga and beyond that didn't hear that, what do you think of Will Wade, and what do you think he's going to do for the Mocs? Now, I know here it's tons of excitement about this guy, and obviously with Jim Foster on the women's side, but people want this men's team to be successful, and let's be honest, the men's team, it was what will bring those fans back to the arena.
No question, and they were gone. When you can hear the coaches in the huddles talking during timeouts, that's a bad sign. And that's the way it had gotten here, and I don't think it was going to change unless leadership changed. And Will is an energetic guy. I was pulling for him to get the job. I knew him and knew what he was capable of doing. He's a high-energy guy that doesn't sleep much, knows everybody. Literally, he's got 3,600 contacts in his iPhone. So he's recruited. He's a relationship builder. He has a good system, an up-tempo system that makes use of pressing and three-pointers. It's an exciting brand. It's a style that kids want to play. And the other thing that'll make him successful, he can recruit. He signed a kid, Greg Pryor, a guard from Memphis that was headed to junior college. And the only reason he was headed to JUCO was because he was kind of one of those diamonds in the rough, and he didn't like the D1 offers that he had. So this was a find, a steal, and he did it in June. So he does this all the time. He's got a track record everywhere he's been as an assistant, Harvard and VCU, which he helped lead to the Final Four a couple of years ago. So you're tapping into that same system that Shaka Smart has done so much with at VCU, and Will was a partial architect of it, especially on the defensive side.
Now, Chris, we got one more question for you, and we'll let you get out of here. But prior UTC men's teams have had a lot of success going the JUCO route. Mac McCarthy dipped into Sullivan Business Junior College, I remember, quite a few times for some great players, Tim Brooks, Keith Nelson, guys like that. Is that the way to build a program in the Southern Conference? Or?
Well, that reminds me of a funny story. I was, oddly enough, this was at Auburn. Mac had just driven up for the game. They were about to play UNLV. This was back in the day when UNLV was really strong. And Mac had on a UTC jersey, and he said, "Chris, you know what UTC stands for?" And he pointed to the letters as he spoke. He said, "It stands for You Can Transfer to Chattanooga."
That's good.
So, yeah, and you know, that's kind of believe that. And you know, I think what Will Wade will do, and he will seek, no matter where they come from, the best fit. He had a JUCO guard on campus visiting a month ago, and just even though he was ready to take him, he just didn't feel right about it. And this would have been a guy with 3 years eligibility. He was a really good lead guard, and Will just didn't get a good vibe, so he sent the kid home early. So my point being is that he'll go JUCO if he needs to. He always tries to save back a scholarship for mid-semester transfers. He keeps a list of fifth-year guys who could transfer with immediate eligibility because of that NCAA rule. So he'll take people, but they've got to have character and they've got to have the sort of abilities that he looks for. And you know, he's got it broken down, man. He looks for example, point guards who played football too. Why? Because you know, especially if they were a quarterback or a cornerback, they're used to making reads, and you have to make a lot of reads in his defensive system. So this guy's got all the bases covered, and I would be willing to bet everything I own that he'll be successful, and probably successful right away.
Well, Chris, we want to thank you for stopping by and joining us on the Sports Outlaws, the OT edition. Thank you for sharing your knowledge.
You gave us way more time than we deserve.
Thank you, sir. You can catch
no problem,
Chris,
guys.
Blue Ribbon, College Yearbook, NBA.com, Big Ten Network. Hit him on Twitter. What's your Twitter tag, Chris?
It's at @CDortch.
At CDortch.
DORTCH.
Follow him on Twitter. You can follow Blue Ribbon Yearbook on Facebook. Thank you, sir, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. This is the Sports Outlaws, the OT edition. The Freak, Cowboy Joe. We're out.